What led people to overthrow entire governments, seek new freedoms, and overturn the entire economic focus of society? From 1750 to 1900, revolutions spread across the Atlantic world, bringing dramatic changes that shaped history. These happened in the wake of the greatest of all revolutions, the Industrial Revolution, in its first and second versions. If you're studying for AP World History, or curious about these concepts, stay through to the end and subscribe. That's what we're about here. We want to help enlighten people, and the first revolution we look at is the Enlightenment, which came along with the scientific revolution. Enlightenment ideas started these movements since they gave new ways to view government, society, and rights. Instead of emotions, philosophers focused on logic, personal rights, and the social contract between people and their rulers. You agree to obey the laws because you expect the government will protect you, much like the mandate of heaven that began the dynastic cycle of China. Enlightenment philosophies and philosophers did not just remain in books. Voltaire introduced Benjamin Franklin to the French Freemasons that made $2 million at the time worth of loans to fuel the American Revolution. These philosophers challenged old institutions. Voltaire in particular hated the Catholic Church. Even though frequently censored, these philosophers drove widespread resistance to monarchies. They couldn't be canceled. Voltaire and Diderot were unstoppable in France. This radical thinking resulted in the birth of the United States through the American Revolution. Don't be fooled with the thought that revolution itself was a deeply radical affair, but the thought process behind it was. Wealthy citizens of the American colonies from different regions did not want to pay the cost for the 7 Years' War between France and England. This eventually saw France spend a tremendous amount of money to help the new United States in their revolution. This drove France into a downward economic spiral because the French people really loved bread, and they had no bread. Then they had their own very radical rebellion of the middle class and poor that increased the status of Napoleon as a general and led to the very bloody rise of a republic in France. This was soon to be replaced by a new empire with the return of monarchy under Napoleon. Different results happened elsewhere, though. In Haiti and Latin America, people fought for independence from colonial rule. The Haitians thought they deserved to be free because France declared the rights of men, but they didn't know that France did not extend that to black men. So a multi-country and very violent rebellion ensued. There was a whole lot of voodoo, and it resulted in slaves succeeding in a slave rebellion in the Atlantic for the first time. France still embargoed them after they eventually won freedom. The French just wanted money and slaves. In Latin America, Bolívar used the power of the American-born colonists to fight back against Spain, which denied them the same rights that were extended to Spanish people born in Spain. He got every aspect of the population involved as he led Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Panama, and Bolivia to freedom from the Spanish Empire. He freed even more countries than Ho Chi Minh, which is quite impressive. The challenge was tremendous, but people took these ideas and fought for freedom, even though many of the rebels did not fight for equality, but a chance not to be taxed, just like the American Revolution. Still, the revolutionary spirit was clear in documents like the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen and Bolívar's letter from Jamaica, which emphasized democratic ideals and independence. These were revolutions of bold ideas, just like all revolutions. Revolutions weren't just about ideas, though, they were also about identity. People felt connected to those who shared their language, religion, and culture. The very idea of being a Filipino began to coalesce more around the propaganda movement and Jose Rizal, for instance. This emerging nationalism led people to believe that those with similar backgrounds should govern themselves. From the unification of Germany, through Bismarck and the King of Prussia and Italy, through Cavour and Garibaldi, to resistance movements like the Young Turks in the Ottoman Empire, nationalism drove many liberation struggles. This was balanced by some terrible decisions by those involved. Many of the religions in this time period were quite bloody, and killings often followed. In some ways, the non-political revolutions achieved better ends. Enlightenment ideas and religious ideals motivated reform movements. The Seneca Falls Conference of 1848 and Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman promoted expanded voting rights for women, while calls for abolishing slavery all over the Americas and serfdom in Russia redefined equality. While Europe and the US expanded industrial production, regions like the Middle East and Asia saw declines in shipbuilding, ironworks, and textile manufacturing. Some states adapted, like Egypt under Muhammad Ali, who established a state-funded cotton industry. In Japan, Meiji-era reforms brought industrialization and established Japan as a dominant regional power. Environmental factors like proximity to waterways and access to coal deposits significantly influenced industrial growth. Rivers, canals, and natural resources like coal and iron helped establish industrial economies. England had been blessed with this. America and other portions of Europe followed. But Russia and Asia industrialized quite late, apart from Japan, which had little resources, which is some of what drove them to colonization and conquest. They took some of their first colonies in Korea from China in 1895, much earlier than people assume. Capital accumulation and improved agriculture allowed regions to invest in factories and machinery. Countries acquired these technologies however they could. Japan had been forced to trade by American Commodore Matthew Perry, and they focused on whatever military technology they could acquire. Their factories were also for women and men, unlike most other countries. The steam engine, precision equipment, and internal combustion engine from the Second Industrial Revolution transformed manufacturing. Railroads, steamships, and the telegraph opened new opportunities for trade and migration. These innovations allowed exploration, development, and efficient communication, even in remote regions. They also made it almost impossible for colonies to fight back against imperial powers. These colonies frequently were only allowed to do business with their mother countries, but thankfully for many of them that would change. England opened up a bunch of free ports that, while not equal, were not heavily taxed. As industrialization grew, Western European countries shifted away from mercantilism towards Adam Smith's free market capitalism. Governments like Egypt's encouraged industrialization as they supported a massive cotton industry, and transnational businesses like HSBC and Unilever expanded their influence. Even compared to how HSBC supported the trade in opium from India to China and Unilever treated workers brilliantly in Europe but used slaves in Africa, there were some dark sides. Industrialization brought long hours and unsafe working conditions, prompting labor unions to demand fair wages, better schedules, and safer workplaces. Child labor was a tremendous part of industrial life and unions. Politicians, women, and churches did their best to eventually work against it. Political groups that supported socialism and communism, like those influenced by Karl Marx, advocated for new societal structures. They wanted workers to own some part of the factories they worked in. Socialists tended to favor workers owning the means of production, and communists added the workers owning distribution and exchange. Capitalism was the economic system of the day, though. It created new social classes, like the middle class and the industrial working class. Working class families often had women and children working for wages to support household income. Middle class women focused on raising children and managing household responsibilities. Governments in Asia and Africa pursued reforms to modernize their economies and militaries. But efforts in the Ottoman Empire, with the Tanzimat reforms in Qing China, with the self-strengthening movement, often met resistance from conservative elites. From 1750 to 1900, manufacturing methods improved, making consumer goods more accessible and affordable. Technological progress laid the groundwork for further economic growth. The Industrial Revolution brought about massive changes. New machines powered by coal and oil transformed economies and advanced manufacturing. People flocked to cities for factory jobs. Manchester went from somewhat rural to quite smoky, right along with London. Rapid urban growth brought challenges like poverty and pollution, but also improved living standards for many, that could find a way to rise. The expanding urban population strained infrastructure and led to rising crime. The reform efforts persisted. Labor unions advocated for better conditions, and Karl Marx's ideas of socialism and communism continued to influence the world. These movements transformed how we view freedom, equality, and our role in society. Enlightenment ideas and nationalism fueled revolutions that transformed the Atlantic world. Technological advances created fertile ground for rebellion and reform. Our modern freedoms and expectations often trace back to those who dared to challenge the old order. If you've made it to the end, what revolutions inspire you the most from this time period? What revolutions would you like to make now? Tell us in the comments, share with your friends and classmates, like the video, and subscribe for more AP history.